Anastasia.
Hi.
How are we doing today? How long have you been back?
I've been back a few days. I've been back in New York a few days, which has been great. When you travel, sometimes it's fun in the beginning, but then you just miss your stuff. So I was ready to come back to my stuff.
I'm surprised you lasted that long, to be honest, because that is me after a couple of days of any trip. Get me back to my house, where I can hide from people.
We are similar in that way. But no, I'm back. I'm glad to be back, especially since I have to start. It's US Open season.
It is US Open season. If you're an American tennis fan, you probably already knew that. If you're not a tennis fan, you're getting into it, you're probably just figuring that out. So, as a recap, Anastasia, reason why I'm mentioning your trip, where have you been?
I've been in Cincinnati. And people might call me out on it, but you're like, were you really in Cincinnati or were you in Mason, Ohio? But I was in the Cincinnati area for the Cincinnati Open.
I feel like that's something that matters more to the people who live there than the people who actually even like people just coming in from out of state like you were. You're like, it's close enough.
It's close enough.
But I'm assuming that people are less likely to visit Mason than they are Cincinnati.
Yeah. No, if you're visiting the area, if you're flying into, because the airport you do fly into is the Cincinnati airport in Ohio. So if you're flying into the airport here, if you don't know anyone in Mason or you're not going to watch the tennis, I don't know why you'd be. Oh, I guess you might be going to Kings Island, which we can talk about as well. But there isn't that much happening around Mason, Ohio.
Ignorant Brit, what's Kings Island?
Oh, my goodness. Okay. So if you are in the Cincinnati Open grounds and you're in one of the stadiums and you overlook, all you'll see are Ferris wheels and roller coasters and this crazy, I don't even know what to call it, but it's a ride where it's like you go into it and then it spins you around, which I don't know why anyone would find that as fun, but people think it's fun. But yeah, so Kings Island is an amusement park right next to the grounds of the Cincinnati Open.
Right. Okay. There you go. So you've got that sort of they're obviously not connected to each other, but you've got those two things there. Again, like in my brain, again, Formula One fan as well as a tennis fan, if you're getting familiar, I know you're getting familiar with that sport, Anastasia. The track at the last race of the season in Abu Dhabi is right next door to Ferrari World, which also has a massive roller coaster on it. You can see it from the helicopters, like of the track, kind of. You've got this building with a giant Ferrari logo on it. So that's immediately what came to mind.
And if you've been watching tennis for a long time, which I know a lot of our listeners are new fans, but there was an incident so the Cincinnati Open also just recently rebranded. It used to be called the Western and Southern Open. So when it was still called that and Roger Federer was playing, I think maybe it was 09 or 19. I'm not sure right now, but there was an incident when he was playing his match and fireworks started at the amusement
that was
park.
Cincinnati. I thought that was the US Open.
No, that was in Cincinnati. Although there's definitely fireworks as well in the US Open. No, but that was at Cincinnati and his match had to be stopped and delayed until the fireworks was over. So that's how kind of close it is. And I think yesterday there was some social media postings by the tournament that showed the skyline with the fireworks and how close everything is. So it's a very interesting event. I really, really liked it and I really love the grounds there.
Let's talk about it then, because obviously that's what we're here, because obviously you've been to Cincinnati and I find I'm the kind of person who plans things a year in advance or as much advance as I possibly can get away with before it starts annoying other people. I've learned that you don't message people to ask if they're free on June 16th, 2025 in August 24. But anyway, I want to hear about sort of Cincinnati, what it's like, because like I've heard a few things from actually other people about Cincinnati, and I texted you about it a little bit, and I want to get an idea of it because like from what you're describing, it's like somewhere between Indian Wells and Miami in terms of vibe and feel. Because I'm thinking about you've got the kind of remoteness of Indian Wells, the sort of you go like the tennis is the thing that draws you to that location, Mason, and the actual town of Indian Wells. But then you've got that sort of vibe of there's things to do and there's action everywhere. You've got a fairground ride next door, all the stuff next door. There is music blaring across the entire grounds. I mean, something that's very noticeable as someone watching on television is when I decided to watch a match in the outer courts, like I decided to watch Jessica Pegula against Karina Mukova. And even on the TV, you can hear the music from the court next door blaring out or across during points, or you can hear the announcers from the main stadiums across the whole grounds. It is very loud, and as an ignorant Brit, very American, which would probably fit more with the kind of vibe Miami's going for, but with a bit more permanence to it.
Yeah, no, it's so funny that you put those two tournaments together because I kind of think you did hit the nail on the head there. There is that remoteness. It is a way. So if you're staying, for example, if you're visiting and you decide to pick a hotel, for example, that's in downtown Cincinnati, it's going to be a 30 to 45-minute drive to get to the grounds. And that's if there's no traffic. So it definitely is further away from a city. It's in a more sort of remote, relatively area, but there's a lot going on. Once you get onto the grounds, it's like a night, it's almost like a state fair vibes, which if you don't know what a state fair is, it's basically a local sort of town event where the locals come and there are games and there's events and there's prizes and dances, and it has that idea of a local fair. And I think that's what makes it actually a little different from events like Indian Wells or Miami or the US Open, where I feel like there's a very big international crowd because those are big cities. Miami, Indian Wells is near LA, so California, New York. So you do get a lot of tourist foot traffic into those events. But Cincinnati, like you said, feels so local and American. Like I feel like everyone who's at that tournament is coming from around the area, which was actually really nice. Like I talked to so many people on the grounds. By the way, everyone was so friendly. Like I went by myself because I just love going to watch tennis by myself. I met some people there that I knew, but then I would just have random conversations with other tennis fans. And it would always be like, oh, I drove in from Minnesota, or I drove in from, the states that are around Ohio. So it does give that sort of really quaint middle America vibe that is special and that I really enjoyed.
That's interesting you're saying that. That sounds a little bit like the first thing that came into my head when you said that was my experience of pretty much going to Wimbledon every single time is I usually bump into another tennis fan or a few other tennis fans I can just sort of chat with and see where they've come from. Now, Wimbledon's a little bit more international. So when I was on court 17, I was sat between a British mother and daughter, and then on the other side, I had an American lady sat next to me. Previous years, I've met an American and a Russian in the queue, or I've talked to various families or individuals, British or otherwise, American half the time, in the queue. And then your story is kind of like, okay, so you've got that vibe of like, it's people who have come in specially for the tennis and this is why they're here. And I like that idea. And again, that sounds a little bit like Indian Wells, which is the main reason why people would go to that. But do you find that sort of experience of being able to strike up a conversation with other kind of tennis fans as easy at those other events? Like obviously you were at Indian Wells and Miami. Admittedly, you were doing other things on site at the time, but
right. But I no, actually, I think it was so much easier to do it in Cincinnati. I don't know why, but there was more sort of a chill vibe to Cincinnati, where even though there was a lot going on, everyone was so open to just striking conversation. And it's, you know what is so funny too? I met a lot of families that, and I think this is just like, I mean, I guess people do it in tennis tournaments, but it's like, I met this dad, for example, who came with his wife and his son, but they all like broke up and went to go do different things on the ground. So I actually saw him while I was watching Iga's practice, and his wife and son were like somewhere else watching something else. And so, yeah, I don't know. It was like a really great, intimate, and that's actually what struck me too, because this is a 1,000 level event. Like, it's a big tournament. All the big names are there, but it still had almost an intimate, small feel to it, which I loved. And I really hope they keep, because I don't know if we'll talk about this, but I'll just bring it up now. The tournament is going to be expanding and it's going to become bigger because, you know, they're going to be more players in the draw. It's going to be longer. They're going to sort of split their time with the Canadian Open. So instead of going to being a full 2-week event, it's going to be Canada and Cincinnati will be 3 weeks. So I think that's great, but I wonder if they'll keep that sort of small town feel to it.
I mean, so I saw that they interviewed one of the key members of the tournament on the Served podcast with Andy Roddick, which if you haven't listened to that, it's a lot of fun. But they were saying, the clip I saw was a guy saying that, well, they're pretty confident because like they have players on the grounds for like the week before anyway, and they're fairly confident that they've got the capacity for it. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing what they're trying to do. I think having a mass event that's like a week and a half is reasonable because, especially with the size the draws have got to be now. So I think that's something to bear in mind when you're planning a trip, is it's going to be from the middle of one week to the end of the following.
Yeah.
So I think that's important, but I think they can get away with it. I don't think it's going to, given that it's already a 64-player draw on both sides, I think they should still be able to get away with the feel that you're talking about. So one of the things you are, and talking about the feeling like more intimate vibes, we've talked before about practice courts and access there, and like you asked me about Wimbledon and how Wimbledon's a lot more restrictive compared to a lot of other American events. I can't remember what we said about Roland Garros. I don't think we had anyone on who'd been.
Yeah.
But certainly Indian Wells, going to watch players practice as part of the program almost. Again, that's the main point of comparison. So I would imagine Cincinnati is closer to what you would expect from an Indian Wells Miami type situation where everyone knows who's practicing when, and you can get there.
Yeah. So like most tournaments now, the Cincinnati Open has an app and they advertise the practice schedule. Now, they have a mix of both, which I think is nice for the players. So, for example, they have a lot of courts, like smaller courts, where when the tournament is going on, matches are being played on the smaller courts. Earlier on in the week, they also schedule practices on those, and you can go and watch and see, you know, Carlos or Iga or any of your favorite players. But they also have a section, which apparently I heard is recently closed off. So they have almost like a bank of about 6 or 8 courts that are sort of lined up together. And as a fan, you can be on a fenced area in front of it and get a good view of like the first 2 courts. But everything else that's further in, you can't really see. So for example, right after Canada, Coco came in to practice, but she would only practice on like the further court. So you could barely see what was happening over there. If you go to our social media, I have some photos and videos of what the grounds look like, and you'll see the area where it's kind of like closed off a little bit. So apparently in previous years, you could actually go around the whole thing and like watch all the players all the time. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's now closed off to create some sort of privacy for players to be able to practice on the grounds, but also not be put on show all the time.
That's basically the Wimbledon setup, what you've just described. Literally that. So that's very interesting. And yeah, I think maybe that's something for the players. It could also be that they need to do work on the 6 to 8 courts to get them ready for the expansion.
Yeah, probably.
So I guess we don't know. But I guess the players quite like having that, as we talked about before, you know, being able to have the option of being able to practice and just get in the zone away from everyone watching.
Because also, and the thing is, for example, if we just use Coco as an example, like her first practice was, further away and, on one of the sort of more secluded practice courts. But then her very next practice was on a court where there were tons of people watching her and things like that. So I think it just gives them an option to have one or the other.
Yeah. And I guess I don't know. I'd be interested to talk to a player about what it's like having people watch you practice. I suppose to just get used to it, but it's a very different situation. And then obviously we want to go back to other things that sort of we've talked about that are important for like visiting sites and whatnot. So with obviously you're saying it's a state fair vibe. This is a bit of a tangent, but so I very well know I have not been to the US. So this story is anecdotal from someone. I studied politics at university, or political science, if like it would be your major if you were in college at the US. And some of my lecturers were talking to me about what the Iowa State Fair was. And essentially, like, because obviously there's all the people going with who want to run for president show up, and they've got to be in their folksiest outfits, and all the food there is fried in some way, shape, or form. So that's the image I've got in my head when you say state fair. I would imagine that's not the vibe we've got when you actually do want to get something to eat at the Cincinnati Open, or how things look when you get there. Is it a bit more permanent?
It's not. It's one of the least permanent sort of food setups that I've seen at a tournament. They're all basically just tents that are like linked together. But here's the one thing I will say. The Cincinnati Open has the most variety of food that I've had at any tournament. I could eat there every day and not get sick of like fried, battered food. It was really great, actually. They had salads, they had acai bowls, they had Asian, they had, Italian. It was a really, really good mix, which I liked. And I also liked that they had a lot of like local, delicacies is a word I guess I could use. But for example, there's this famous ice cream store called Grater's in Mason, Ohio, and they have a tent there. And of course, that was the tent with the longest lines because it was good. I did stand in line for, a bowl of Grater's ice cream, and it was fantastic. But yeah, so I really did like the food. It is, I think, just like most tournaments and most live events, it is expensive. There are some stores where you can get stuff that's reasonable, but I remember, for example, I got this the tiniest bowl of pasta that you could ever get in your whole life. And it was $16. And I was like, wow. So it definitely is expensive. There's things you can get, but I did like the fact that they had variety. Like a lot of people went to this place called, I think it was Playa Bowls, and they do this like acai bowl. So that was also a popular spot. But yeah, I like the variety that they had.
Okay. And I think this is stuff that I know that you would want to know. And so we're letting other people know. Personally, I'm the kind of guy who, to save money, probably wouldn't buy food on site and would take as much as he could get away with. But again, not tried doing that in the US, so I don't know how much.
Yeah, and the thing is, so for example, we are going to come talk about the US Open shortly, but I don't live in Cincinnati, so I didn't have like a kitchen to my disposal or anything like that. But usually when I'm home, I take my own food to tournaments because it's cheaper, it's better, and I just feel better during the day when I eat like not so much.
So much fries. So many fries.
Fries are good once in a while, but not every day.
Yeah, so there you go. Health check for everyone here.
Yes.
Don't eat fries every day, people. It's not good for you. Mums, get your kids on listening to this.
We're giving all the important tips here.
Yeah, for all kinds of things. So I don't think we talked about this before the tournament, probably because I've missed a couple of shows. But what's it like? Say, okay, great. I've got an idea of how to get there. Say I want to plan my trip for 2025. I know it's longer. I guess when I get there, how much of the ticket's going to set me back? And what is it like in comparison to the other big US events?
Yeah. I think in comparison, it's probably the one that's the most reasonable, especially at the 1,000 level. So I'm comparing this to Indian Wells in Miami. And They don't specifically have a ground pass. They do not. They don't have a ground pass. But what they do have is, I know, thumbs down, we should have a ground pass, but they have reserved seating on different courts that, get you onto the grounds. And obviously you use that. You can go to the smaller courts and stuff. And those start for as little as $10. That was really great. It was really, really great. And obviously, that's at the beginning of the week. So, for example, it kind of fluctuates and gets more expensive as the weeks go on. And as we get to sort of like the quarterfinals level, semifinals level, finals level, the tickets get more expensive. But by the beginning of a week, you could get tickets for $10 to watch qualifying and things like that. They don't have, they actually do have one free day, which is called their community day. And you can go in and there's a lot of stuff going on the grounds, and you can also watch qualifying for free. But for the other days, it starts $10, and then there are $30 tickets, $50 tickets. So it is not bad. It is actually pretty great. And then to get like a courtside seat is about like, depending on the day, again, it kind of fluctuates throughout the day, but there were courtside seats for like $170, $150. That's courtside, where you can see these players really close. So if you want to splurge a little bit on those days, there are two main courts that are connected. It is the funniest thing I've ever seen. They're literally almost like interlocked together. There's a tunnel where you can go from one to the other, which is really cool.
That would explain why you can hear everything.
Yeah, they're literally interlocked. But yeah, so it's like Stadium 1 and Stadium 2 are the two main courts, and then you've got the others all around.
That's interesting because, again, on my app that I watch tennis on, it was calling them center court and grandstand.
Yes, you can call them that too, center court and grandstand, because there isn't like another one or two kind of thing. So there is center court, grandstand, which I would say is Stadium 1, Stadium 2, and then it goes to 3, 4, 5. My favorite is the sunken court 10, which is... It's the most perfect place to watch tennis. It's a little sunken court. It's where I watched Lulu Sun play for the first time. I'd never seen her play in person, so that was really great to see her play after her run at Wimbledon. And her first match was on court 10, and it's a perfect place to watch tennis.
That sounds a little bit like the sunken court they've got at Rome, which I've seen.
Exactly. Yeah. It was like a mini version of that. It is just like that. And especially now that I've done that, I can't wait to one day go to the one in Rome, because it's such a lovely, you do get this sort of like players are dueling and you're in the Colosseum kind of vibe, but I liked it a lot.
Trust the Americans to come up with something kind of a knockoff version that the Europeans are already doing. Anyway, I feel like I've spent half this podcast slandering the Americans, but I don't want to do that because you actually put on a very good tennis tournament.
No, it is a great tournament.
You actually put on some very good tennis tournaments. One of which we are now gearing up for because it's US Open time, baby.
Yes, it is.
Now, everyone listening is probably thinking, but my calendar says US Open doesn't start until Monday the 26th. You're right in that that's when the main draw singles starts, but the US Open actually starts on Monday because, well, Anastasia, do you want to explain why you need to treat US Open as a 3-week event or a 2-week event?
Well, it's funny because I think no other tournament does this better than the US Open. And call me biased if you like, but the US Open has Fan Week, which is the first week before the main tournament. And it is, I think, the best ticket in all of tennis. Why? Because it's free. It's complete free. It's $0. You do not have to pay for an entire week with caveats. There are caveats to that statement, which I will get into in a second. But yes, Fan Week starts on Monday. Cannot believe it. I cannot believe we're here already. And this will kind of segue me into a little bit of a story time before we get into the US Open, because it's been almost a year, Nick, since we started Groundpass.
It is almost a year. It's been about, almost a year since our first episode, which is like September time. That's when our release anniversary was. I think you started talking to me about the idea for the podcast around the end of or just after the US Open had finished last year. But yes, this is getting to the point where you were starting to think about doing this, right?
Yeah, no, it was. So for anyone who doesn't know, who hasn't been listening to us, or you're just listening to us for the first time, I work in the film and television industry. And last year, there was a big strike, which meant that we weren't working for most of the year, which was terrible. But I took advantage of the time and decided to go to the US Open every day. The US Open is my home tournament. I have never done anything like that before, and I probably will never be able to do anything like that again because I work. We have to work. But no, so I went every single day from the very first day of fan week to the men's final. And it was quite the experience. And it was the first time where I had just sort of got to know a lot of other fans and sort of started to pay attention to people who watch tennis in the States. And I just thought it'd be really cool to sort of contribute to this world of tennis. And I had already had a podcast before, and I thought, what if I had a tennis podcast? And it's actually spurred by, so at that time I was contributing to Talking Tennis, which Nick still commentates on. If you ever want to watch, listen to commentary of a tennis match that you can't watch, those are really great channels to go to on YouTube to watch it. But at the time I was contributing to that, and I was doing a daily vlog of just talking about my day each day. And it was just such a great experience. And I wanted to keep doing it, and I wanted to keep talking about tennis. And I thought, sort of helping out the casual fan who doesn't know about it. Someone asked me the other day, it's like, why do you do Groundpass? And I was like, well, most tennis fans watch tennis 4 times a year. It's just the fact of the nature. Most tennis people just watch the 4 Grand Slams. But so much happens in between the Grand Slams that affect what happens at the Grand Slams. Tournaments before the Grand Slam, it kind of it tells you more about, because I think some people show up at Grand Slams and be like, why is my favorite player not doing well? And you're like, well, 2 tournaments ago, they sprained their ankle or something. You know what I mean? So I just thought it would be a great resource to sort of give casual fans hey, this is what's going on during the year, but also to sort of encourage people to go watch tennis live, which I think is the best gift you can have or give someone, is go watch tennis live and you'll be a fan forever.
I think there's a load of people, that's the experience I have when I'm talking to people at Wimbledon who maybe that's their first experience, and they're like, oh, I might follow this more because that was actually a really, really great experience, and sort of getting into it. And one of the things that I remember you telling me about sort of when we first got started, you may have even said it on the first episode, I can't remember whether this was a conversation or a podcast, because let's face it, ends up being the same thing a lot of the time. And about you being at the US Open on the grounds, and there were people around you who didn't know who they were watching on sort of the outer courts, and so who's this who's this Matteo Berrettini guy? And we're like, yes, former Wimbledon finalist of 2021, top 10 player. Everything about him looks great except his backhand, kind of thing. So
yeah. And that actually even happened in Cincinnati. I was sitting next to someone and they were like, wait, who's that? And, what I was actually, so I was watching Navone practice, and these ladies came up and, they were a little drunk, I will say. And they were like, who's that? And, he was practicing without his shirt on. So, they were all like, who's that?
Oh, no.
And I just, so I had to sort of break down. I was like, well, this is who he is. He's doing so well this year. He just had this epic 4-hour match with Rafa Nadal. But you could see their excitement, and they were like, oh, we're going to come watch your next match. They looked up the schedule and they were going to show up to watch his match, because now they had a reference of who this random person that was just hitting a tennis ball was. And I think that's what I hope we can bring to our listeners is sort of tell them the stories of tennis players. And so when they do go to these live tournaments, they can use a Groundpass and go to the outside courts and see some really great tennis.
And not just the ones who lift trophies.
Yes, not just the one that lift trophies. There's stories everywhere in tennis. But yes, that's our little sort of aside about the origins of Groundpass and where we're going. I bring this up to say you might be seeing a few changes coming to our social media channels and, podcast. Just stay tuned. It's going to be great. It's going to be exciting. I really enjoy the time that I come on and chat with Nick about tennis, and we're going to keep going. We're going to see where this goes. But US Open is here. Let's chat about it.
Let's chat about it. So, Anastasia, let's say we get this podcast out and our listenership is in New York or can get to New York fairly quickly and is not working this week. Maybe you have some time you need to use. I don't know. American annual leave works differently to the US.
We don't have leave. We don't. That's a different podcast.
Okay. Yeah. Or maybe you're a school teacher and your kids aren't back at school yet. Whatever. You have time on your hands. You can get to US Open Fan Week. I mean, how would you plan a day around Fan Week, and this might be a good opportunity for you to make us aware of how the freeness can catch you out potentially. Yes.
There's always a catch, guys. Nothing in this world is free. But no.
More messages for the children.
Yes. I guess that's what this episode is about. Messages for the children. But yeah, so I do truly believe this week of the US Open is the best ticket in tennis. It is a completely free week. And during this week, what's happening is qualifying matches start on Monday for players who are trying to qualify to get into the main draw of the US Open. And there are a lot of names that are on that list. For example, JJ Wolf is in qualifying. You might remember we talked about Billy Harris, who lived in a van. He's in US qualifying. You have Heather Watson, Haley Baptiste, Robin Montgomery. They're all in qualifying. So it's a chance to see really great tennis happen in the first. So technically qualifying lasts Monday through Thursday, and you can watch those for free. Come in. I think the gates open at 10 and play starts at 11. Yes. And it just goes on through the night, which we can talk about later. But that's one great part of it. And then you also have player practices. So qualifying mostly happens on the outside courts. They reserve the main courts. So that is Ash, Louis Armstrong, and Grandstand. They reserve those for practices for players coming in the week before the main draw starts to start sort of getting used to the environment, getting used to the grounds. And it can be really great. I have seen, I was watching Serena during her retirement year practice, and I was like front row Ash, and she was, maybe 10 feet away from me. It was a really great experience because, again, if you don't remember when Serena was playing her last retiring matches at the US Open, those tickets were going for thousands of dollars. And I could not afford thousands of dollars to watch one of her matches, but I could afford free to go watch her practice. So those are the things that you can do. And I would suggest downloading the US Open app. Again, all tournaments have apps, and in the US Open app, they have a practice schedule for every single day. And it goes pretty much, so they open the grounds at 10, but you'll see they'll put practices starting from 8 a.m. in the morning all the way till 8 p.m. at night. So you can, maybe even after work, you can stop by the grounds, watch some tennis, and also watch some practice as well. Now, not everything is free. So there are a few highlight events that happen during Fan Week that are not free. For example, the Taste of the Open, which is supposed to be kind of like a food event where you can try out all the food that will be available. That's paid because also players attend it. So it's kind of like a a paid experience where you can, quote, hang out with players. You're not really hanging out with them. You can see them from afar.
You're in the same space as them, but there's usually a few guys in between you and them.
Exactly. Then there are also some exhibition events. So, for example, I'm not sure if they're calling it Mixed Madness, but it's basically a doubles exhibition where you have, like, this year, I think Coco Gauff is pairing up with Ben Shelton. I think Venus Williams is pairing up with someone else. And it's basically a mixed exhibition event that they have. You have to buy a ticket to that. What you also have to buy a ticket to is a big exhibition where they're going to have Carlos Alcaraz, Novak Djokovic, Andre Agassi. I can't remember who the fourth player is now, but it's a big exhibition event where the singles players kind of like have an event. And you can check the website. I'll leave all the links below so you can look at the website and see where you can get the app from. But these events, they're usually for charity. So a portion of your ticket does go to charity. And they're very kind of fun. The players are mic'd. And it's just like a fun time, a fun night. They usually start at around 7:30 p.m. and then go into the night for the most part. So those are the paid parts. There's, of course, a kids' day, which is a big thing on the weekend. But yeah, I think Fan Week there's so much to do during Fan Week.
I think it's worth digging into some of this. By the way, I've just Googled it while you were talking. It's John McEnroe is the fourth player.
Yes, John McEnroe. Yeah.
He still knows how to handle a tennis racket, fortunately. So, that should be interesting. I think having the three of them and Carlos Alcaraz is probably going to be the one he's going to be the one going. So, how do I make these guys laugh? Because obviously Agassi's Novak, very well known for messing around on court, and Johnny Mac will get in on it. But so we've got loads. You've got loads of options. You've got exhibitions to see. You've got practices to go watch. You've got qualifying you can go and enjoy. So there's lots of actual tennis being played. But I mean, you talked about obviously the food event happening, and like that's ticketed because obviously players are going to be there. I'm assuming that there are other things to do on the grounds as well as watch tennis. Like, is there like stands and things? There's food to buy. Is it like a fair vibe?
I mean, a very, very, very big fair, I would say. So there's definitely food. There's definitely food around, but I will say US Open food, bring your own. It is so expensive. It is so expensive for what you get, but it is also all fried. Like, I mean, I got a little sick last year because I was just like, that was all I had to eat every single day. And I was like, there must be something else other than fries. And there is, but it's tough. I'm not going to say, I think that's the one failing of the US Open. And who knows, maybe they'll change things. Like they do evolve it every single year. Like I've been going to the US Open for years, and every year there's like a new stand, there's a new mix of things. So maybe that will happen this year, but the food options were not my favorite at the US Open. They obviously is a ton, this is not the message for the kids, but there's like a ton of alcohol. Like I think the US Open has become a little bit like I'm sure everyone's seen the videos of the guys with the cups, and then they just like have a whole tower of cups. So it's a big thing at the US Open to get the honeydews and how many cups can you get and things like that. So there's stands everywhere for that. It's the sponsored drink, or it's the signature drink of US Open. And the vodka that's made with it is one of the Grey Goose. They're one of the sponsors of the event. So that's the food and Hashtag not sponsored. But so that's like the food and drink portion. And then there are little, I wouldn't say there's a lot of activities to do per se. Like for example, during Kids Day, they make it a whole thing. Like
I was going to ask about Kids Day because we might have some mums and dads listening who might think that sounds like a fun family day out.
Yes, it is a really fun family event. And I would suggest going to the website. Again, I will leave the link because last year they gave away thousands of free kids rackets on Kids Day for free, which is really cool. If you have a kid who's trying to get into tennis, all you have to do is register for Kids Day. And when you walked onto the grounds, you got like a QR code and your kid got a racket. Like it was actually pretty cool. I think also the clip that a lot of people have seen from last year's kids game is when Carlos Alcaraz and Iga Swiatek, that event happened on Louis Armstrong, and they were playing like with football, like giant inflatable footballs, and they were trying to kick it over the net, and it was fun. Like it's actually a really fun event to go to. Another viral video that I think a lot of people have seen is baby Coco Gauff at Kids Day at the US Open. The one of her like dancing and stuff. So
that was Kids Day, was it?
That was Kids Day. Yeah, that was Kids Day at the US Open.
There's a lot of photos of kid Coco Gauff around, because I know there was another one with, she was like, someone went, oh wait, that's Coco at a Venus Williams match from years gone
that
by.
I don't think that one was I don't know if that one was US Open, but it's the one where she's dancing to Call Me Maybe. That was Kids Day. Yeah.
Oh gosh, that's made me feel old, because I remember that coming out, and I was definitely not a child when that song came out.
Same.
I don't know if I was a minor at that. What year? I don't know what year that song came out, but I'm pretty sure I might have. I don't know if I was technically a minor or not at that point. But
yeah, but you were definitely not a kid.
Like I've gone. Oh gosh, yeah, I'm that much older than Coco Gauff.
Yep. Yes, it is a reminder every time. I mean, she just turned 20, but anyway, we digress. But so no, Kids Day is a very well attended, fun event, and in that case, they bring out a lot of like games and like things to play. But for the most part, I think most of the booths and stuff at the US Open are promotional. You know. So it's all about the sponsors and the sponsorship. But there can be some cool perks of going to them. So for example, last year, the Cadillac booth, if you went through it, which was like this sort of like virtual experience, like you went into this little room and a video played, and it was like the whole room was a screen. So, you know, there was like stuff on the ground. You were standing on images and stuff. So it was like a virtual event. And if you went through it, you got a $20 gift card to spend at the US Open, which always worked for food. So there are little things like that.
That's good for food. I thought you were going to say $20 to give thing towards a Cadillac. I was like, that's not going to cover much.
No, that won't cover the mats. Not even one.
It wouldn't even cover gas.
It wouldn't cover gas. But, Fly Emirates, which was also a sponsor, they had a booth and they were giving out like, you know, the seats that people like to take around to sit in the stands and stuff. They were giving those out for free. They were giving keychains. So there are a lot of like little things like that around the grounds, but it's more sort of sponsor focused.
Okay. So you go. I just wanted to give a vibe because it's good for people who maybe haven't been to go and know what you're looking for, and maybe plan your day around fan week a little bit and sort of know, okay, this is what I'm going to. So it may well be there's things you dip in and out of between whatever practices or qualifying matches you go watch. Also paint a picture a little bit for maybe some of our British listeners who haven't been, who are used to Wimbledon, who do nothing like this.
Yeah.
Like little bits and pieces might sound familiar. Like there's definitely some corporate stuff that happens, but it's not quite the same. And certainly not on the same sort of scale. So I think it's quite interesting to see that. Okay, so that's Fan Week. That's the free US Open. I think it's a good time to talk about this as well, because I don't want to leave this to the last minute, because we do have listeners who are already going, okay, US Open might be plausible for me this year. The main draw starts on Monday, whenever this podcast comes out, like within a week of the podcast coming out. And so let's talk about that. So how much of what you see at Fan Week carries over into the US Open proper? And maybe this is the point where we start talking about basically how much is going to the US Open going to set you back, starting with our good old friend, the Groundpass.
Yes. So everything around the grounds remains the same. What does change is the practice. The practice now is relegated. There's a little practice area when the tournament is going on. So because of course, every single court is going to be taken over by match play. So you won't see any practices there, but there is a little section of practice and all the stars go there to practice. So you'll see all your favorite players. The one thing is it is a relatively small area to the size of the tournament. So they get packed quickly. This is something I've witnessed because, again, everyone wants to go see Carlos Alcaraz practice. Everyone wants to go see Iga Swiatek practice. And once the gates open at 10, what most people do is sprint to the practice court area. And I've known people to just camp out there for the whole day. It's not what I would do because I love to watch tennis. But I do understand if it's your only opportunity to see your favorite player because you're not buying the tickets to the bigger stadiums. Like, for example, Carlos Alcaraz is probably only going to play on Arthur Ashe, so if you're not going to get tickets to that stadium, your one opportunity to see him in person might be on the practice court. So I completely understand people who sort of make their way there first. How much does it cost to go to the US Open? It's expensive.
Yes, the laugh tells me a lot because you're like, you already hinted at it. Carlos Alcaraz being on Ashe already prices out most people. So let's build up to this.
Yes, it is a lot. And I will kind of do a really quick review of all the stadiums. And so you kind of understand where we're going with the pricing and stuff. So
yeah, because there's a lot of stadiums at the US Open, by the way.
Yes.
Not quite as many as the Australian Open has, because I feel like they've got like 3 or 4. I think from what you described to me when we did the Wimbledon episode, US Open does have these 2 main stadiums with a couple of smaller ones. Like you've got Ashe and Armstrong, and then Grandstand as being the slightly smaller one, and then everything else should be kind of fair game for a ground pass.
Yeah, so you've got Arthur Ashe, which is the only stadium that your ground pass will not get you into. It's the only one. It's a standalone ticket. You have to get an Arthur Ashe ticket if you want to go to Arthur Ashe. Then you have Louis Armstrong, which is the second largest court, and the lower bowl is all ticketed, but the upper section is available to ground pass holders. First come, first serve. Same thing with the grandstand, which is the third largest. Lower bowl is all ticketed, but the upper section is available to ground pass holders. And then you have court 17, which is the fourth largest stadium, and your ground pass gets you to every single seat in there. There's no sort of reserved ticketing for court 17. So those are the 4 main courts, and then everything else around the grounds is fair game for ground pass holders. Some other courts have more stadium seating. Some only just have benches on the side. So depending on the size of the court is what sort of seating will be available at the court.
So if Wimbledon's your reference point, it's pretty much the same kind of vibe. I mean, the exception being a ground pass would not get you into court 1 or court 2. And there is some reserved seating at court 3, which is the equivalent of court 17. That sounds very confusing. Just go with me on that. But yeah, so even with those kind of caveats and kind of slight differences, anyone who's been to that should be able to kind of get the vibe of what the others. I mean, I think that it's unlikely. I don't know how likely it is that if you're American, you've been to Wimbledon and not the US Open, but I suppose it's possible. But if you're a Brit, it's definitely going to be that way around.
So that's kind of the lay of the land. And now let's talk tickets. So ground passes have just been increasing every year with demand. Tennis has become very popular again in the States, and the ground pass that used to sort of be like $25 during like the first week is now $133. Yes, if I remember correctly, for a ground pass. And that also fluctuates during the week. So it kind of starts in the 90s. So like the first couple of days is $90 or so. And then as you get to the middle weekend, which is a holiday weekend in the States, it gets to be about $150 without tax. So you add on tax and you're close to $200 at that point. And then as you get into the second week, when basically the grounds become mostly doubles, junior, wheelchair events and all that, it then trickles back down. So then by the end, you're maybe at like $50 for a ground pass by the end of the event. So it's expensive.
Yeah. So for reference, I've just done a quick check of the exchange rate. A US Open ground pass is 3, 4, or even 5 times the price of a Wimbledon ground pass, which even by the end of the tournament, like at the very last day of the tournament, a ground pass is free because there's very little tennis going on a non-ticketed court, or more or less, like I think it might be a 5 or 10. And I would imagine it's also very, very much more expensive compared to pretty much any other US event that you could go to, like Cincinnati, Indian Wells, Miami is the 1,000 level and definitely more expensive than the 500s or 250s you go to.
Yeah. So it definitely is an investment, I will say, if you're coming to the US Open, especially if you want to go over multiple days. And then you kind of start getting into the ticketed areas. And just for my personal preference, because I think it's important to share as well, I do not like Ash as a stadium court. It is massive. It is so massive. And if you're on they have the courtside level, then they have the 100s, the 200s, and then the 300 levels. The 300 level is where you start getting into sort of affordable prices for tickets at Ash. Like the 300 level tickets are anywhere from sort of like $50 to $200 in that range. But if you're up in the 300 levels, you're watching players and they look like ants. And you're mostly watching the big screen. So that's my main thing with Ash is I'd rather almost watch it at home than watch at Ash. But yeah, the tickets for the lower levels that's more reasonable, it's expensive.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds crazy. Like, yeah, you could in theory get into Ash for cheaper than getting a ground pass.
Correct.
Like
which is a
seats.
hack. Yes. So I was going to end this with a few of the hacks that I have in terms of going to the US Open. And one of my hacks is getting a 300 level ticket to Ash, which is, I don't know, sometimes it's $50. It depends again on the match, but that is a cheaper ground pass and you just don't go into Ash and you just stay on the ground.
Yeah, because they just let you into any other court, right? They don't check your ticket to see whether you have a ground pass or an Ash ticket.
Exactly. So that's definitely a hack I've used before.
Useful hack. Note that down. Write that. The SpongeBob beam. Write that down. And
one thing I also have to note, though, because you might be thinking, okay, these are reasonable prices that Anastasia is talking about. Let me get on Ticketmaster and try and purchase tickets to the US Open. Guess what? The US Open sold out. There are no tickets available. The US Open is currently sold out, and the only tickets available are resale tickets. Boo!
I'm guessing they're going to put some tickets on sale like the day before, once they know who's on, and they can charge a lot for it, because you've told me before US Open ticket prices are very variable. So like the stuff that's sold out is going to be the fixed price, where everyone's just going to take a gamble on what they want to get. Whereas I could imagine that there's going to be other stuff going, okay, now we know who's playing and we could charge you thousands of dollars to watch Serena Williams. Not that she's going to be playing, you know what I mean? Or several $100s to watch Novak Djokovic, or Carlos Alcaraz, Iga Swiatek. Coco Gauff probably would fetch quite a bit of ticket price in the States now.
Oh, definitely.
And you're saying sold out. Does that include ground passes?
That does include ground passes, people. So, just in the world we live in, we can say this is my hack number 2. A lot of these tickets are purchased by resellers, because that's just what happens now, is that people just buy up all these tickets and then they try to resell them for a lot more money. Mm-hmm. So and this has been happening now, I think, for the last at least 3 to 4 years at the US Open. And what I've usually done is I just wait to the last minute. You obviously have to be very flexible and willing to take a gamble. But I remember last year I got tickets to see Novak play in the final. And I waited till about, I think it was like 30 minutes after the match started. And I got tickets for like $150, which
Okay.
for the
Wow.
men's final is incredible. But I waited till the very last minute because the first 30 minutes of the finals is always fast. It's like the national anthem, music, warm up. I didn't miss anything, basically. So you have to be able to take that gamble. So a lot of times what I do is like, okay, I'm going to go spend the day at the US Open today. I won't buy any tickets. And then I show up at the box office and I see what's available. Sometimes also what I've seen is they'll say it's sold out, but when you show up at the box office, there are all these tickets available. And a lot of times what happens is corporate seats, like people who've like they have a lot of seats that are reserved for corporations that sponsor the event. And they kind of, I think what's happening really is that they wait till the day of, and when they realize, okay, all these people are not coming, they kind of put those tickets on sale at the box office. So I've gotten some pretty great deals by waiting till the last minute and then also showing up at the box office on the grounds to see what's available.
That's a really good idea. That's actually very similar to how Wimbledon works with the queue. It's the same kind of principle in many ways, but the ticket prices don't change. It's unlikely to show up and find that the men's final is half the price of what you would expect it to be.
Right.
So $150 for that is like, that's a great hack. And like, I hate the idea of waiting for the last minute. That just stresses me out. But if it's going to get you a good deal, then fine. I mean, part of it is thinking, why did we not record this when US Open tickets are first released? But I guess US Open tickets kind of go on sale like 12 months before, like as soon as
when they go on before. So Amex is a sponsor, so their pre-sale Amex tickets that went on sale in June. And I know people who tried for that and it was sold out then. I think if you remember that time on Twitter, and I saw a lot of people who were upset because they were going in for the pre-sale and the pre-sale was sold out. So by the time the tickets came out for public, sale, which was, I think, a month later, they were all sold out. They were all gone. So it's just unfortunate that is just what it is now, is that there are a lot of resellers who are buying up these tickets in the hopes of making money from them.
Yeah, which is actually why Wimbledon sells tickets in the way that it does, because Wimbledon actually has declared war on resellers and, has done for about 100 years and and that's why they sell tickets the way they do, to make it as hard as possible for resellers to move on, to the point where, like, if you have a resale ticket you bought off someone else, you probably wouldn't get in.
Right.
So I think that's interesting, a sort of very different way of doing it. And then you kind of go and you pay through the nose for it, but there's all these other tickets that are available. Because like I would be tempted to do a podcast episode like, okay, US Open tickets are going to come out and you need to get on and do this right away. But as someone who's been going to the US Open for the last few years, is this the first time you've seen the US Open sold out this quickly?
Yes, it didn't sell out last year. It didn't. Last year was definitely difficult to get, but it didn't sell out right away. So this was a little shocking and exciting, because part of me is like, oh, this is so great. Tennis is so in sort of like a growth period in the States that US Open tickets are sold out months before it even starts. But at the same time, I wonder, is it the popularity of tennis? I think it is the popularity of tennis, and just because I think the resellers think they can get a lot of money from people who want to come and go to the US Open. But I have to say, this is the first year where during Amex resales, it was like sold out, which is crazy.
So the box office might be your friend if you're going to the US Open this year. Otherwise, again, you might be listening to us and planning a trip for 2025, which is not what I had in mind when we started recording this.
Again, it's so funny. I have a friend who is coming for the US Open during the middle weekend, and I gave her all my tips and tricks, but like you, she just had to know she had the tickets. So she was willing to spend an arm and a leg and just get the expensive tickets instead of sort of waiting and seeing what's available when she gets there to the grounds. I'm more willing to take that risk because I live here. If it doesn't work out, I'll just go home. Yeah, it isn't that sort of crazy for me. But yes, it's definitely a risk to take if you're going to wait and just kind of see what happens.
Do you know what? I would love anyone who's listening to this who's like a British fan who's used to Wimbledon, or an American who's come over to do Wimbledon, because I've been mentioning this because that's my point of reference. They are the most comparable tournaments probably out there for me, and also probably, again, they're both Grand Slams. I would love to hear your thoughts from anyone who's listening, on which of these sounds more stressful. Like having to fight your way through resellers and like turn up at the box office, waiting 30 minutes after a match is slated to start to get get tickets, or go through some extended ballot system or queue on the day. Like which sounds more stressful to you? Because I feel like neither of those are like perfect, to be honest.
No.
And such is the way it happens when you follow a popular sport. Or you could just only go to tennis when it's like smaller tournaments. I say smaller. Obviously, America's got 1,000 events, so they're not that much smaller.
No, there are options for people. But yeah, so that's the sort of ticket scenario. We've talked about like where to eat and stuff. What else if you were coming over, what other questions do you think you have?
I think I wonder how much I'm playing. I think you've kind of covered how I would go about getting tickets, which is kind of my main thing. Because like once I'm on the grounds, I don't care. Like you do something, you download the app, you get your schedule, you look at who's practicing. Because obviously, again, going to see practice is an option. Probably it's not as accessible as some small tournaments, like at 1,000 level, but it's still pretty good for seeing people practice, I gather. So checking your practice schedules, checking your match schedules, and seeing who you want to go to. And then just basically dot around. Like, I mean, my mum would kill me for this, but I could probably go through most of the day without worrying about eating something. Yeah. This is like, and she knows this, and I get in trouble for this all the time. Yes, I am 30. But at least I don't live in her basement. So we've kind of moved past that point. But hey, look, in this economy, you kind of have to. But so I think I've kind of got a vibe of like lots of detail of what would be needed to go to the US Open. So hopefully that's helped anyone listening with that. If, on the other hand, you're listening to this and going, good grief, that just sounds like a load of palaver. Good news, there are a couple of other tournaments you could go to this week that might be closer, might be easy to get into. There's a WTA 500 in Monterrey in Mexico, which has got a few big names in there. I think Danielle Collins is coming back at that tournament.
Navarro's playing, Paolini's playing.
Yeah, Paolini, new big name, was there. But the two US tournaments, 250s, and there's an ATP event in Winston-Salem in North Carolina, which is a big 250. It's a 50, what is it? It's like a 48 player draw for a 250, which is crazy. And then you also have a tournament that's probably actually not that far geographically from the USA, which is a WTA event in Cleveland.
Because it's in Ohio, it's closer to Cincinnati for sure.
Okay, my US geography is way off there, so I apologize. I thought Cleveland was closer to New York State than to Ohio. No, I've got that completely wrong.
But yeah, there's some really big names playing. So in Winston-Salem, for example, Eubanks is playing, Dan Evans is back. He's going to be playing in Winston-Salem. Riley Opelka is back again as well, and he's playing in Winston-Salem. And then in Cleveland, which I like it's called Tennis in the Land, which is in Cleveland. Leylah Fernandez is playing there, Beatriz Haddad-Maia, and Sophia Kennett is playing there as well. So some really big names playing big tournaments before the US Open. I think we mentioned a little bit who's playing and qualifying. So there's a lot of tennis that's going to be happening in the next week for sure. And you'll be able to watch it either for free or in a town near you somewhere.
Yeah. And that'd be great. Obviously, check it on TV. If you can go to those smaller tournaments, go to those smaller tournaments, because that's going to be where a lot of players who aren't in qualifying and who aren't top players who've done well in Cincinnati are going to be doing some critical warm-ups. Okay, Lelo Fernandez did quite all right in Cincinnati, but I think there's going to be. I think the players who do well in those tournaments do tend to get some momentum, so you can get to learn some names. So if you can get to Cleveland, okay, not if you're native to New York, clearly, maybe you're close to Cincinnati and you fancy doing a back-to-back, go to the 250 there, or think about checking out Winston-Salem in North Carolina. And think about it. You will have noticed that Anastasia and I haven't gone through like results on this show. First of all, we've been going for over an hour at this point, but we wanted to make sure that we kind of gave you the feedback of what it was like to visit Cincinnati, because obviously that's why Anastasia was there, and also as well as having fun for yourself, and also get you prepared for visiting the US Open. And prepping all of it. So I think what we'll do next week is we'll kind of bring you up to speed with all the key player stories ahead of the US Open and dedicate some proper time to that. So you guys have now got a week to plan your US Open trip if you want it, or a year to plan your Cincinnati or US Open 2025 trip, whichever one you want to take from this episode.
Yes. So we will be back next week with what happened in Cincinnati, and the draw should be out at that point for the US Open. So we can kind of talk about the stories and like what we could expect from the US Open tournament. So yeah, that's it for this episode, Nick. This was a great one. Definitely one people should bookmark. Something I did want to mention too on our social media, especially on Instagram, really, I've started creating little highlights for each tournament. So you can go back to those if you miss something we said or whatever, but there'll be a lot of information there to see sort of like little things that we did at the tournament and tips and tricks and stuff visiting. Sure.
So hopefully one day you'll be on the ground to watch all the tennis, and you'll be crediting us with it. So I guess we'll see you next week, where we'll get excited for all the things you can see with the Groundpass
at the US Open.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.